We're ready.
Hello. Okay, we're live. Welcome to the second podcast, the Best Nerds podcast of the... Hey, I loved that. I thought that was great. Welcome everyone to the second podcast of the University of Illinois Chicago Summer Institute on Sustainability and Energy. And thank you to all of our co-conspirators and friends at UIC and the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund. So today we have Ian Monroe and Kelsey and Kunal and Mikki, who will be here in a moment. We're going to be talking about transportation, innovation and transportation. I'm going to start that over. Innovation and equity in transportation. So I want to start with a little bit of an introduction and tell you about, first we can tell you about what SICE is, if you don't know. If you're for the uninitiated, the Summer Institute on Sustainability and Energy is an annual program hosted at the University of Illinois Chicago. It is sort of a crash course in all things related to the great pursuit of sustainability and the energy systems of tomorrow. Everything ranging from city planning, aka the letters after my name here, to how does a nuclear reactor work? And so it's sort of a great intro to all these things for anybody who's interested in any part of it, the engineering, the sort of social implications of all this stuff. Hopefully figuring out how to build a more sustainable tomorrow. So, yeah, I guess I can go, we're going to be talking about innovation and equity in transportation. It's sort of an exciting time right now because we have a new presidential administration that has made infrastructure investment a huge priority. And that is after several years of an administration that did not have such a high priority for that, as well as some other legislative things going on in the previous administration that made it sort of hard to advance a lot of the infrastructure objectives that some people wanted to advance. So basically the idea is transportation is a sort of vital part of American infrastructure, and we know that our infrastructure is in really bad shape. On our last episode, we talked about the power grid and how the power grid is in really rough shape by way of the blackouts in Texas from the winter storms. So transportation specifically, we'll get into that in a minute, but yeah, let's talk about, we can go around and have everyone introduce themselves briefly and sort of say what their interest is in the specific thing. I'm Nat, I live in Detroit, and I've become really passionate about this issue since living here because of the struggles we've had in developing a regional transportation infrastructure. We have a state that is like overwhelmingly dominated by what we call SUVs, or single occupant vehicles, aka cars. So I'm really interested in figuring out how we can advance equitable access to transportation within Detroit and beyond. I don't know how brief that was, but on to Kelsey. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Slavor. It's good to be here with all of you, and welcome to everybody who's just joining us for the first time. I'm actually in Eugene, Oregon, currently is where I live and work. I'm also in planning and kind of parks and recreation, master planning. However, I do a lot of kind of volunteer work around housing policy, affordable housing advocacy policy. And so while I am certainly not a transportation expert, or I wouldn't say I am, that wouldn't be like my strength in planning, planning, I think obviously housing and transit are irrevocably entwined. And so as we think about the future of housing and what it means to increase density, what it means to, again, provide housing near services, a huge piece of that is transit, that at a certain point you can live in the best place, but if it doesn't enable you to get anywhere, your quality of life is pretty impacted. And especially, if you're relying on single occupancy vehicles or your car and there isn't access to public transit, that has huge environmental and public health effects. So from my standpoint, I'm really interested to learn more about this to kind of better integrate kind of how I think about housing with transit. So I will pass it off to Kunal.
Thanks, Kelsey. I'm Kunal Sahasrabudhe, and I have almost no expertise on this subject, but a lot of interest. So I grew up in India, and I spent a lot of my time getting places, taking the bus. The bus system was pretty solid, was pretty high quality, very available. So was the train system. And then when I moved to the US, I guess I spent 4 years in college where I didn't have to go very far beyond campus. But the year after I graduated, I worked pretty far from home, and I spent a lot of time commuting. And I thought there's got to be a better way than changing 3 different transit modes and not having a single way to link them together and so on. Timetables out of whack. You miss, one thing is late by 2 minutes, and you miss the next bus, and now you're waiting 45 minutes. And started to think there's got to be a better way, just from my own perspective. And then I moved to Austin a couple of years ago, where by American city standards, the public transit is decent. But between COVID and the impact it's had on a lot of people's ability to commute by bus and train, just because we've been trying to social distance, that's been on my mind. Since the weather started getting better, I've been trying to bike to work, which is a single occupancy vehicle, but much smaller and much more likely to be hit by a truck. So I guess access to bike lanes has been on my mind a little bit. And there's sort of, when I moved here, I couldn't get a license, couldn't get insurance at my place, couldn't get a lot of things without having a car and having car insurance. And that seems to be a state policy. And so there's a whole lot of different disparate, we are very dependent on cars kind of thoughts that have come together in the last few months and rekindled or rejuvenated. I wouldn't even say rekindled, really, just like driven more interest in the topic for me. So it's been on my mind off and on, and more on than off of late. Ian?
Hi, I'm Ian Monroe. Thanks, Kunal. I probably the resident car nerd out of everyone here. I'm more big into transportation and cars and automotive stuff in general. Live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which has a really good public transit system. And I've been on this planet for almost 40 years now. And when I moved to Pittsburgh, this is the first place where I've ever used public transit. So coming here and using it for the first time, it opened my eye to a lot of issues that I did not know about. And I've become more and more entranced by public transportation since then. And when my wife and I bought this house, one of the keyest things we looked for was how close is it to a public transit line. So for me, public transit, it's one of those, we have a car, but we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint as much as possible. And we're trying to minimize car usage with that. So, while we do have a car, we try to utilize public transportation as much as possible, but COVID and everything else kind of put a quirk on that. But we've taken public transportation matters really to heart, and it's one of those things we try to look for, like politicians and everyone else we want to talk to. It's like, what is your public transit stance? So it's definitely something that's opened my eyes to a lot of things around me, and this is a bigger issue than what I think people realize what it actually is. So before I go off the rails, I'll pass it back to Nat.
Thank you. No, I appreciated that transit related pun there, going off the rails. I often will refer to, firing on all pistons, or, when you live in Detroit, everything has to be automotive related. But the interesting thing there about the sort of, there's a Pittsburgh Detroit connection in the transportation space, because it's impossible to get here to there by train, but what you can do is look at the connections between the automotive industry here, the big 2.5, as I call them, so Ford and General Motors, and on rare occasion Chrysler, aka Stellantis, and the sort of self-driving car, autonomous vehicle technology, a lot of which actually originated in Pittsburgh, which is kind of a thing that they don't talk about when everybody's all about how cruise automation is in San Francisco. And cruise automation was actually sort of taken from its original iteration and then basically built up from, not from scratch, but from a very small thing into a very big thing by General Motors, our own homegrown little small mom and pop shop here in Detroit. So, that's one of those interesting things. The reason why I wanted to sort of mention that was because when we're talking about the innovation part of this, a lot of it is really, there's this really sort of deep kind of hype around this question of the self-driving robot cars of tomorrow. Like we were promised flying cars in the film Back to the Future, and obviously that hasn't come to pass. We see what happened to rest in peace, John DeLorean's company. John DeLorean, of course, worked for General Motors for a number of years, and then was like, "This company is too conservative for me. Like, I'm a young go-getter who likes to wear double-breasted Italian suits, and working for a company where you'd actually get sent home for wearing a brown suit instead of a blue or black suit, allegedly, according to his autobiography." So, I mean, there's this whole thing about like obviously nobody thought we were going to have self-driving cars in 2015 or whatever. But what was really interesting is when I moved to Detroit, a lot of the conversation was about how autonomous vehicles were going to be on the roads in a couple of years, and like, you better get ready. It's this crazy thing. Robots are going to, transport us to the moon or whatever. And that clearly hasn't happened. However, what we've learned along the way is we've sort of defined what the future looks like, and what it probably will look like. And they always talk about this sort of case future. I put that in air quotes. It's connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. And so we've hit a couple of those. General Motors is committed to converting in January. I guess they announced they're converting their entire lineup to being electric in the next like decade-ish or something.
Electric cars and carbon neutral by I believe 2030 is their goal.
That sounds right.
And whole fleet, I believe, or something close to it. Yeah.
And so you can look at that and say, well, they're just caving to the radical liberal agenda, or you can say, wow, that's a really impressive transformation of the economy, if they think that that's where the economy is going. If you compare, like, when I put on my MBA hat, I compare General Motors to Tesla. General Motors is trading at like a sort of fractional earnings multiple, and Tesla is like $1 bazillion or whatever. So everybody's like very excited about what they're doing, and people are not as excited about GM. We have a new guest who we will bring on. But yeah, give me 1 second here. Kelsey, talk to me about.
I can chime in really quick. One thing too I've been thinking about with the AV concept is that, and I think Nat brings up a good and interesting point, is like there was this kind of big hype rhetoric that I remember as well, just like conferences and things that I attended in my professional space back in 2017, that this is like a pretty immediate future with AV and all of this stuff. And yeah, that hasn't come to pass in maybe at the speed that we were anticipating or any of that. But I do find it really fascinating that it kind of, though, has become a thing where like the capacity is out there, like the technology is out there to make it possible. And I've been questioning, and I don't have an answer for this, but I've been questioning, like, are there still places and cities that are going to be caught politically completely unaware by the deployment of this new technology when that comes out? Because thinking about like city planning and policy, and the ways that we are, setting ourselves up now to be or not be AV compatible in the future, and kind of what is that, again, like political landscape. And I don't have an answer for that, but that's been something I've been kind of concerned about is that I think there are some places that are going to be ready and that have thought about it, and there are some places that are not thinking about it at all. And how is that going to kind of change our public landscape?
I mean, that is an interesting. I didn't think about that before. Because in first impressions, I think it would be the smaller, more rural areas where it's more sprawl than anything that they're going to be, I think, more caught out by, because they're thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead with traditional technology, and I don't think they'll. And I think this is where they're going to probably thinking they're going to say, well, we're going to rely on tech to come up to collect the solutions, to work with us, to provide the answers, and that's not our problem. But it's going to be interesting to see, to say the least, because there's some very, very smart individuals in cities across the country that are working on this. But it'll be interesting to see these small rural areas come, like, they're going to have to face this at one point or another. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it.
I think that one of the most interesting things I've looked at is this question of what are the sort of things that have to get modernized in order to modernize other things. And this is kind of why I wanted to bring Mikki on, because Mikki and I know each other from welcome, Mikki, by the way. Mikki was out enjoying the wonderful weather. We're actually going to get you to do a sound check real quick. So if you want to just talk and make sure, you can introduce yourself, say hello, and we will tell us about yourself and tell us who you are.
Okay. Hey, sorry I'm late and sweaty. It's 75 degrees and biking. Whoa. Mikki Taylor-Hendrix. I am here in Detroit. I work for the transit system here, which is called DDOT. We are a bus transit system, so we operate the bus system in the city and in some of the entering suburbs. I am on the service planning team, so most of my work is specifically around service planning, making sure the routes and the transit network meets the needs of riders. And as travel changes, travel demand, where people live and work, we just want to make sure the routes and the service we provide matches that. I also lead most of the community engagement for the transit system. So I do a variety of engagement, from making sure our riders are involved in our service planning to working with other city departments on plans around the city, connecting with employers, making sure we have the right stakeholders and the right relationships with the right stakeholders. And that's about it. Happy to be here.
And we are happy to have you. So I kind of the reason why I had invited Cam Hardy, who is from Cincinnati, and I had met Cam. It's one of those things where you meet somebody and you can't remember. You meet somebody at a conference and you can't remember whether you met them because they were a panelist or a speaker, or whether you met them like at the bar or something. And I think that's always a good sign, because it's like, oh, I remember this person had really good stuff to say, and I was like, I need to talk with this person more. And Cam has been involved in a lot of advocacy in Cincinnati. Cincinnati has a lot in common with Detroit, where it's like this sort of Rust Belt city, if you want to use that term. Some people don't like that term. Mikki is from St. Louis, which
is another Rust Belt city.
Has that term applied to it. But Cam and I had connected there because he has some connections with, or he knows some people I know from Detroit. And so we had been talking about this challenge of getting advancing proposals to invest in infrastructure in Detroit. And we'd been talking about proposals to invest in infrastructure in Detroit. And I know he'd been leading advocacy efforts in Cincinnati around the same thing. For the uninitiated, pretty much every transit system is funded completely differently. So you have a combination of, you have federal and state grants maybe, and then you also have local operating revenue that comes in from the fare box, what they call the fare box recovery ratio. And so the biggest thing is that, like, a lot of these local systems, they'll get funding from taxes of some kind. So tax millages, what have you. In Detroit's case, we have DDOT, which is the City Transportation Department. And we have SMART, which is Southeast Michigan Area Regional Rapid Transit, something. I don't know.
Suburban.
Oh, Suburban
metro area. South Smart.
Smart. It's called Smart.
It's a long name, whatever it is.
And so Smart is one of those things that people say, well, why do I have to pay a separate fare to go on a suburban bus? You can actually take the Detroit buses to the city limits, and then you have to go somewhere else, or you have to get on a separate bus. You have to pay a fare for it. They just recently introduced the DART fare card, and so the idea is like now you can the idea is to have a unified fare card system. But the reason, and I'll eventually shut up about this. Just want to drive home this point that when we're talking about innovation, we can talk about electric buses, we can talk about self-driving cars or whatever, but at the core, a lot of these issues are very local. And in Detroit, in Metro Detroit, we had this gentleman who ran the inner ring suburb county. Kunal informs us it is actually the Suburban Mobility Authority for Regional Transportation. And the two people in Michigan in this room did not know that. We just are bad. So in Metro Detroit, it was like very much this thing of the county executive of Oakland County, which borders Detroit on the north side, aka 8 Mile, the city limits of Detroit, to the inner suburbs up to the sort of rural, post-suburban area. And he was basically like, I don't like Detroit, so I'm not going to fund transit there. And when I was covering this as a journalist, I'd go to these public meetings, and you'd have all these people in these public meetings who would say, well, we don't want our tax dollars to fund buses for those people. Of course, this issue that like Detroit provides a lot of labor to the suburbs, but Detroiters cannot get to the suburbs, and it's this huge issue. So long story short, we now have a new executive in Oakland County. There's a lot of hope for this new investment, a renewed interest in investing in transportation infrastructure that can cross these borders and boundaries, like literal and metaphoric or whatever. Last thing I'll say about that is that the sort of going back to the beginning of the discussion where we were talking about a lot of this optimism around infrastructure investment with the new administration, the Biden infrastructure plan that is proposed to invest $1 billion in various kinds of infrastructure, not just the 6% in roads and bridges, as it has often been lamented by certain people, but also things like public transit and power grids, which are a lot of times connected with each other, surprisingly. Mikki, tell me about what are you excited about that's going on in the city these days in your line of vision or work?
Everything. So I've been here for 4 years. I've been working with the transit system the whole time I've been here. Relocated from New Orleans, Louisiana. So was a bit taken back by the relationship between the city of Detroit and the suburbs. Took a while to kind of understand it. Now I know the history. I understand the political dynamics a little better. So I'm excited to see people coming to Detroit. Even today, like I could tell a lot of the people enjoying downtown Detroit don't live near me. And so I think some of the conversation is still around, oh, well, parking's so hard in downtown. And so while those conversations keep happening, I think people are more excited about new mobility services. And for me, I think that will naturally bring people, hopefully, to understanding you don't need your car to go everywhere. You don't need your car if you're afraid to park and don't want to pay too much to park. You don't need your car to go around the corner, to go to a coffee shop.
But can I ask, isn't parking a God-given right, Mikki?
Of course.
Right. So this is the challenge that we have. So one of the things is like this question of, there are a lot of companies that will offer transit passes to their employees, and that's like this great thing or whatever. But one of the things that we're kind of behind the times on is this idea of getting rid of parking minimums, which are basically saying like for every 1 unit of building,
you need 5 parking spots.
Yeah, like whatever. So it's like,
yeah, I think that's still definitely happening. But I do think while conversation around mobility, even from the historical, the Ford, the FCA, now Stellantis, I think we're seeing them get more involved in mobility. And so I think with them stepping into that space, we'll see some level of evolution in transportation here in Detroit and in the region. My hope is that as that keeps happening, people like myself can keep knocking on doors like, hey, you forgot to invite me, but don't worry, I'm here anyway. And people will understand, like, okay, yes, you can have Uber, you can have Lyft, you can have scooters, you can have bikes, but public transit is still the basic and the foundation of mobility. So even beyond the fact that, oh, poor people use transit, poor Black people use transit, you know, if you want to get on a bike and you don't live by a bike share, guess what you can do? Take transit to the bike share, or, you know, you can use it to connect to these other modes. And so that's what I'm excited about. The conversation is changing, getting away from the second you hit 16, you need 2 cars, and people are moving back into the city and realizing, no, I don't want to pay $150 on top of my rent just to park a car. So,
or more than that.
Right.
Can you give some perspective? You've spent some time in New Orleans and
Mhm.
also St. Louis. Can you give some perspective of so I from what I one of the things that was interesting to me about living in St. Louis is that they had a reasonably modern system. Like,
Mhm.
it was like, you know, buses were fairly new, but they also had this this light rail system that was sort of like, there was a large portion of it that was funded by the state of Illinois because it connects to an Air Force base. But like, what are some sort of perspectives that you've thought of, like, coming from different cities and thinking about, let's say, St. Louis, New Orleans, Detroit? What are some sort of like lessons or cultural ideas about how people think about these things, and what we can learn from them?
I think so. I didn't realize how good St. Louis public transit was. I used it to get to middle school. I used it to get to work when I worked at Target. I used it to get to sporting events that were in downtown. And then I went to New Orleans, and of course they have the streetcars. And then I got to Detroit, and I'm like, whoa, St. Louis has an actual regional transit system. So yeah, some of the counties in Illinois are connected. St. Louis County, St. Louis City. I'm not involved in the politics, so I really don't know how well things are. I knew I could get where I needed to go. I thought it was cool. I was blown away when I got to both cities, New Orleans and Detroit, that people want light rail in a car lane. Like, you can't go as fast as you should be going if you're in. Get out of the street. Figure it out. So I don't know. I think, and then also New Orleans, the one big thing is that we're relatively similar in the idea of who uses transit. It's, if you should have a car, it is a status. If you don't have a car, you are poor. There is a reason why you don't have a car. And it's not a choice. So I think what I've learned is that Chicago, New York, DC are still the meccas of mobility, and people will, if you use transit in any city that's not those, what are you doing?
So on that, one of the things that's interesting is this idea of so Mikki mentioned the whole, like, driving the train in the car lane. For anyone who is unfamiliar, we have this train called the Q line, which goes on a languid 3.3 mile loop from downtown Detroit to the New Center neighborhood. And this is a good example of, so for my thesis research, I did a lot of looking at this question of public-private partnership. And I put that in air quotes because a lot of times public-private partnership means city governments don't have money, so they're going to figure out what companies do have money, and then they're going to give them everything they want and use taxpayer money to pay for it. That's the cynic's view of what a PPP is. At the best perspective is that it's a way that facilitates private sector innovation and the sort of nimble flexibility of private sector capital within the framework of something that serves all the people. And so the Detroit Q line was one of these things that was arguably more toward the first one of those. So the Q line has not been operating for the past year and some from because of COVID. It's not operated by DDOT, and it's operated by a private is it nonprofit?
I think they created a nonprofit too.
Nonprofit operations thing, but it was promoted as a like an economic development tool, because it's like, oh look, we have this new streetcar. It's not necessarily promoted as an actual robust transit system. And the difference is you see people getting on the Woodward bus, which comes every like 10 minutes or
12.
12 minutes. Okay. versus the queue line, which may or may not come every 20, 25, 30 minutes, whatever. A lot of times I've actually beaten it by walking. But this is a really interesting perspective because it shows that like there's a fracturing, not just of suburban transit authority versus the urban transit authority, but there's also this private sector thing where like the Kresge Foundation of Kmart fame spent tens of millions of dollars to subsidize the development of this thing. It was largely promoted by one real estate developer who is, several billion-dollar net worth and has looked at this as a way to promote real estate development, which arguably it has. Mm-hmm. Does that mean it's successful? No, it's not successful as a transit system. Is it successful as a real estate development tool? Arguably, maybe. So I could rant about that for a long time, but I wanted to give Kelsey a chance to ask a question from Please go ahead, Kelsey.
Thanks, Mikki. It's really nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. I was saying a little bit earlier, I live out in Oregon and I'm a parks and recreation planner out here. And something that I've been thinking a lot about for parks work that I also think applies to transit, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts about, but just, like out of many things, but coming out of the pandemic, thinking about just like the role of kind of trauma-informed design in parks and how we've pretty much been under this lockdown condition for a really long time that's just made people way more nervous about being in public space, being really close to people, all that kind of like interpersonal relationship components that we've really had to step pretty far back from. And I've been thinking about that as it pertains to parks and what does it mean for people to kind of show up into parks, after vaccinations are kind of rolling out and all of that. And I guess I'm curious from your perspective, if that's been a conversation that's been existing in like the public transit world of like what it's going to look like or what it's going to mean for people to get back into transit, especially when we've been kind of like living within this culture of fear that has been justified, but this culture of fear of being in close quarters with other people is inherently dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you just have any thoughts on the future of transit as it pertains to kind of recovering from that mindset.
Yeah, that's part of my job was increasing ridership. And so the last year and months has been super difficult. And I'm kind of like, when do I start doing that again? And I know it's not now. So yes, that is a huge concern. But realistically, at the most basic level in transportation, our ridership didn't decrease as much as many other transit systems because we provide service to a lot of essential riders. So people are still going to work to these essential jobs, and a lot of them are using public transit to get there. So the immediate response, and even now, one of the big focuses is how do we make sure public transit right now for who it is serving is safe for the operators, for our bus drivers, and for the rider. So we've done quite a few things around that. It's been difficult because we've had to reduce the capacity on our buses to allow people to social distance. And that's been really hard because a bus is full with 10 people or 15 or 20. We've increased that since people are getting vaccinated and we started collecting fare again. That meant buses were passing people up. Buses that looked relatively empty, buses that realistically were relatively empty, were passing people up because the capacity decreased. And so it provided a lot of immediate problems and immediate challenges, whereas it wasn't like, oh, shoot, what do we do 5 months from now? It was like, oh, shoot, we have a fire right now that needs to be put out. And I think right now our focus is still, how do we handle these immediate issues that are already happening? We really haven't taken that huge step to say, okay, now what do we do for future riders? Now what do we do for people who might return to the office in the next, who knows when, right? Because the pandemic is here. I think one of the big things we will need to do is just communicate the data. A lot of the data says people are not getting COVID on public transit. They're not contracting COVID on public transit. A lot of the data says, wash your hands. We've installed hand sanitizer on all of our buses. Wear a mask. We have been giving out the amount of masks that DDOT has given to riders honestly should have been a major news story. People were the Pistons donated masks to DDOT. Originally, we were supposed to have something like 100,000 masks, and then it was when they're gone, they're gone. And we have not run out because people are donating them. We've, the CARES funding is there. So we've been able to really, in my opinion, provide the city with masks. And so I think as we continue to do that, we've made it safer for our operators. We install driver barriers. They have their masks. Of course, we've increased cleaning. So we've done all of these things. And I think just making sure people know that and they see it, and then the data supports it. I think the big thing is just communicating that. We have an app to pay. We did recently reinstate fare. Fare was free for a very long time, more like than most other transit cities or transit systems I've talked to. Yes, I think if the data supports it's okay to use transit, I think we just need to work on communicating that, because we are doing a lot already. We've been doing a lot since the beginning.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you bringing up a great point that I never even thought about. But yeah, even the concept of like transit as a key distributor for just getting people masks, I think is brilliant. And yeah, something I hadn't really thought about. So I appreciate you sharing that. That was really interesting.
Thanks.
One other thing that sort of, I will kick this back to Kelsey in a moment, but one of the things that I remember from this conference I went to many years ago, there was a gentleman from Lime, and Lime is, of course, the scooter company that has, it's like one of the major competitors here. We have a few different ones. And it's been interesting to talk to folks at the city about how they manage scooters. So I think a lot of people are like, they view them as a sort of fun little toy. You can get around, like you and your drunk friends can crash into cars. I say this because my car was crashed into and has a big old dent because a drunk girl crashed into it. And so it's sort of like people don't think this is necessarily a legitimate tool to get around. And the city is taking this approach of sort of saying like, well, like just put your scooters in and we'll figure it out, whatever. Other cities have actually started like charging fees or whatever. And so they're talking about that now with the city. But I went to this conference a number of years ago, and this gentleman from Lime was basically like, one of the coolest things about getting people to become scooter riders is because it turns them into advocates for better infrastructure. And the reason is they get on a scooter and they're like, wow, like these streets are jank. Like these potholes are like, this is like some bad situation. Like I'm, because a scooter does not have shocks. It's not like, doesn't have suspension. It's not like a bike or a car where like you have big wheels and you can hit a bump and you don't feel it. A scooter, you feel every single bump. So people ride these things and then they say, what can we do to improve the state of our infrastructure? So Kelsey, just take that to the next step with a question.
Yes, this is one of my favorite questions whenever we have just experts around, that I'm always curious. Mikki, from your perspective, I think I'm curious where we were talking right before you joined us about kind of the big national level infrastructure conversations and, funding packages and all these things kind of happening at this big national level. And I think there are fundamentally a lot of people, especially younger people, that are, interested in these issues and care about them. But there's sometimes this like local disconnect about, okay, I care about this thing, but what am I to do about it? And I guess I'm wondering, from where you sit and even in Detroit, if, speaking to people who maybe know about transit and kind of know the big kind of core tenets of what we're trying to do based on national news, what do you recommend or what do you advise for people who want to get involved in kind of being more pro-transit or transit advocacy kind of at the local level?
So honestly, start with your own space. So example, I started biking just when the pandemic started. I used our bike share Mogo. Shout out to Mogo. It was by my house. I was tired of being in the house. It was 45 degrees. I said it's warm enough to go outside. So I hopped on Mogo. It was free for the whole month of April. I was like, I'm on it. And then I started saying to my friends, hey, let's go on a bike ride. So we actually did a Juneteenth bike ride. It was so funny. So a lot of my friends came. We all used Mogo. And we came down Michigan Avenue, which has bike lanes. And people will just say, oh, first of all, let me back up. First, we have to realize a lot of, to your point, Nat, earlier, people here, car is it. These streets are for my car. Get out of the street. Get out of my way. You don't belong here. And so the conversation of policy, we can't even get there, I think, without making sure our residents, our stakeholders, understand this is not your street. Yes, this bike belongs in the road. Do not honk your horn at me. If I get close enough to you, we're going to have a conversation. Roll the window down. I have something to tell you. Our streets here in Detroit, I don't know if you're familiar, Jefferson Avenue, I live on Jefferson, and the speed limit is 35. And people complain about the bike lanes. And they're like, traffic. I'm like, yo, I guarantee you, you're still going above 35. You're still speeding with the bike lane. So stop. So I think that's a big part of the conversation, because until my friends, who some of them are from Detroit, some of them aren't, they're not public transit users, they are not cyclists, they are motorists. Until they were on a bike and saw a car parked in the bike lane, they did not care about those bike lanes. The second it was them and they had to then figure out a reroute, what is this car doing? Then I was like, that's it. You have to, like the whole scooter thing, you have to experience it when you've been so programmed and most of your experience has been, I need to get where I'm going, convenience and car. My recommendation, like I biked on Michigan and I'm like, the bike lanes need work. They're faded, but the amount of people that are parked in them, I'm calling the apartment building. I say this every time I do it, every time I bike on Michigan, but I'm gonna have to call them and be like, yo, please tell your residents that these are bike lanes. Like, just move over 10 feet, 5 feet, not even 10.
There's just real quick on that note too. I actually had a conversation with someone from the city about this, and I said, why don't you guys enforce ticketing of these bike lanes? I mean, cars parking the bike lanes. And the one guy was like, we do in this place, but we don't in this other place because the lanes are all worn out. So they just started restriping. I don't know if you saw that. They just started restriping Michigan between Trumbull and, so it's by the old Tiger Stadium site where they built this huge new apartment building. And they've been parking in the bike lanes, but they're just now restriping it. So it's sort of like no excuse anymore, right?
And that is a fair excuse because they are that faded. Where if I just moved over here or if I'm going to this business, I really don't know that this is a bike lane. So my suggestion would be start off with your local, whoever is in your space. If you work at a place that has a huge parking lot, say, hey, have you all thought about like people walking to work or giving out transit passes? Get your employer involved and do it as an advocate, right? So say like, I actually use the bus or, I bike a lot and I would love to be able to do that to get here, but here are my obstacles. Your, I don't know, block club I don't know if that's a Detroit term, but whatever community group you have in your particular city or your neighborhood. If y'all have bike lanes, like talk about it. If you don't have bike lanes, talk about it. I think it starts there to just kind of show people you might not be aware. This might not be something you're familiar with, but you know me and I'm familiar with this. So now that you know somebody who uses these things and would benefit from the infrastructure improvements, now we can have a conversation about it. Then I think reach out to your local officials, become a stakeholder is what I'm trying to say. So reach out to your transit system and say, hey, you want to come talk at this Black Club meeting and talk about what transit service you have in this neighborhood? Reach out to the bike share. Hey, you want to come talk at this Black Club meeting? You want to come talk to my employer? I can connect you with the HR person. Your church, like whoever it is, become a stakeholder, get your peers to attend their meetings because DDOT has meetings every month, but we can also come to your meeting, right? So just kind of build that relationship and then figure out from that professional level, how can I help you? So what is it that you need to make transit infrastructure better? Because it's not always the same thing. I know one thing we deal with a lot of Detroit is already built and we just struggle with this isn't transit friendly infrastructure. So if you don't have the money right then and there to fix it and it's not on your immediate to-do list, what can we do in the interim? If of course, manufacturing is really big here. So if you work for an auto supplier that's building a new location in a new industrial park, tell them to talk to transit before that industrial park goes up, because please don't call me after and ask me to solve your problems. No. Or it's just not easy, right? So we'll work with you, obviously, but it's not easy.
It sounds as though you are speaking from a direct experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think, but my overall, long story long, become a stakeholder.
No, I think that's excellent advice, and I super appreciate that. And your point about becoming a bike commute. I used to, in normal times, would bike commute to work, and that was usually when I would start to realize, oh, when I'm in a car, I should not act this way, or I shouldn't park in this way. And not kind of seeing that until I became the bike commuter, I really resonated with that. So I appreciate you sharing. And I know in terms of bike questions, I think we have Kunal with a specific bike question, so I'm going to pass it off.
Yeah, I mean, I want to start first by echoing Nat and Kelsey and saying thanks so much for being here with us. And it's really nice to meet you and really nice to hear from you about transit as a whole. Biking is something that's been on my mind a little bit. The weather's been nicer. I've been trying to bike to work and realized sort of over the last year, as Thomas says, outdoors has been in. Biking for recreation has really picked up quite a bit. Bikes have been sold out. Bike equipment has been sold out. So we've got like kind of the one piece, which is a lot of people have bikes now. On the other hand, a lot of employers are trying to, build infrastructure. I'm trying to push to have some good bike racks indoors at work so that people can store their bikes. But there's kind of this middle piece between having a bike at home and having a place to store it at work, which is the infrastructure on the road. And even for my commute, which is either neighborhood streets or a street with bike lanes most of the way, that bike lane is full of broken glass and gravel. And even when it is well demarcated, like people drive however people drive, put 2 wheels in the bike lane, put 4 wheels in the bike lane, put 2 wheels on the curb. Why not? So I guess one of my questions here is, do you expect to see, following this boom in people getting bikes and getting outdoors, an improvement in infrastructure on the roads? So what can we do to push that versus, people saying, you know what, I'm just going to bike to work because it seems like a good idea and getting ahead of it. Do you expect that people on the roads will follow the infrastructure will follow the people? And what's like, in your mind, the quickest, easiest solution to make biking safer and make it more palatable to people? Especially when you're outside city cores. In a lot of city cores, there's a lot of good bike infrastructure. I'm just a little bit north of that, where there are big roads and small bike lanes. And I'm not unique in that regard. Like, a lot of people live far away from town. So what do you expect will be, so what's the chicken and the egg here? And how do we push broadly for improved bike infrastructure alongside improved transit? In addition to things you've already said, which would have been very helpful already.
I think so. And I'm speaking very much as a 32-year-old Black woman. I think bike infrastructure is on the up and up. I think we're seeing a lot of cities say, hey, let's go for bike lanes. I think we're seeing, cities are trying to attract the younger residents who are already working there. Now they're like, okay, come back, or, come live here. And so I think we see it happening. I think the way it's happening, and shout out to Detroit, because thank you for the bike lanes. You are seeing still a lot of pushback from residents, a lot of pushback from people saying, you didn't start doing these bike lanes until white people started moving in. So these bike lanes are for me. The reality of it is a lot of people bike already. A lot of Black people bike already. A lot of people who cannot afford cars, they're already biking. So are they biking safely? No, because there is never any education about how to do that. Are they biking on the sidewalk? Absolutely. Are they making their own paths? Yes. My recommendation, and so I think it's happening. I'll say that. I think the infrastructure is coming. I think we're seeing cities maybe pull back a little bit when they get that pushback. And so when you go into a historically Black neighborhood that is starting to change, commonly known as gentrify, I think you're seeing a lot of Black residents push back. And it's not even necessarily because they don't like bike lanes. It's because, where were you before white people moved in? And is this for me? Is this for my kid? Is it for, people of color, or is it for the white residents so they can get to their cool new places quick? I think, to your point, as employers, big employers, when the right people start asking for it, the infrastructure will come. Unfortunately, those white people are the right people. And I'm not trying to be like foul or disrespectful. I'm just trying to be honest. The employers, when they say, hey, city, I need my employees to get to work and I'm not paying for their parking, then you'll see cities say, and it's not even a bad thing. It's just that it's that stakeholder relationship. Thank you. Like, we've needed to hear that from you, because we need to work with you to make this happen effectively and be utilized well. So I think when the right people ask for it, it'll start to happen. And it is happening. They are asking for it. In my experience, I use the bike lanes. I love them. A lot of people will say, nobody uses these bike lanes. And I'm like, you're not looking. Like, you're just not looking. Again, because you're in a car.
A very quick note about that. One of the things that comes up a lot is that in the transit advocacy / transit justice space is the fact that I don't know the exact number. You might know, but number of Detroiters who don't have cars.
Oh yeah, 25. It's about 25%.
Yeah, which is people are like, oh well, it's the Motor City, so buy a car. It's like, well,
highest insurance,
right,
in the country for a long time.
Exactly.
And we're not in that. That's just like, that's just. That doesn't even get to the issues of once you put a Black person in the car, what's their experience, or once you put, like that doesn't get to policing. That doesn't get to policy. If I cannot afford car insurance and I get pulled over, what is the consequence of that? It's huge. It's expensive. So the idea of bike infrastructure is great, but a lot of times, like you said, bikes are sold out. They're sold out, right? But who's buying them, right? So when we find out, like, who's comfortable using this infrastructure, are they residents? Are they people who live here? Are they stakeholders? If not, then you might get the pushback on the opposite end that says, no, don't do these bike lanes. I want these lights fixed. Two different pots of money, right? Apples and oranges. But to an average resident, they don't know that. And so I think it is we're going to see it happen. I'm happy that, unfortunately, the pandemic got people outside. It got people to shut down streets and open up restaurant seating. That was amazing to see. It got people to realize these streets have better uses. I should be outside biking. I enjoy it. It's fun. I can get where I have to go. Oh, I don't have to pay to park to go 2 miles, right? So I think as that happens, as it continues to happen, we will see the infrastructure follow suit. But I honestly, I think it's already off to a good start.
I had a sort of follow-on question. You said something about how the infrastructure is coming in with gentrification, and people are pushing back saying, "Where was this earlier?" And that's a completely, to me, completely valid and completely understandable pushback. But at the same time, I'm wondering whether this is a chance to say, "Hey, like, thanks for putting this in here. It wasn't there earlier, but like, show me you mean it by putting it in these other neighborhoods that are not gentrifying so fast," and like, kind of advocating for other people where advocating for yourself didn't work. And I know that's a hard place to be. It's a hard place to put yourself out there. But do you see that as kind of a viable way to get that infrastructure rolled out everywhere rather than in the sort of upmarket or gentrifying areas, and get, improve that equity of access to bike infrastructure as well? And like, what has your experience been with that?
So personally, I work very closely with the planning department. I don't think it is in response to or because of white people moving in. I think Detroit is in the position where they have the money, they have the resources, and they are ready to make improvements. I think, unfortunately, that is the assumption. And I think that is just the thought process of people who've been here for a long time and haven't seen these types of improvements until white people started moving in. So I don't agree with that statement because I personally don't think it's true. I would say I wouldn't do it either. I wouldn't, and I would put bike lanes where there's people and where there's people biking, right? But I think there are conversations that have to happen that they're not easy. It's really hard to get the people who are biking that aren't using these bike lanes, right? The people who have been biking because that is their mode of transit. People who are biking in the winter. That's who you need to talk to. And a lot of times they're not the people coming to your meetings. They're not accessible. They're not tuned in. So you have to go where they are. And again, that could be their employer. That could be, talk to these churches, talk to these Black clubs, talk to these schools, like talk to the kids, like you have to reach people and have a preliminary conversation, because when they see the bike lanes coming, then they've made up their own mind. They've made up their mind about what's happening. And so I think I wouldn't put bike lanes in an empty neighborhood. I wouldn't. I would look at the data, and if that neighborhood has a lot of people who don't own cars, then I'm gonna give you then I'm gonna say, okay, well, what do they need? Better transit service? Do they need bike lanes? Do they need a MOGO station? Because they don't necessarily, they might even own the bikes. So absolutely find the solutions for this. To me, public transit and transit in general, get people where they have to go. That is the job of transportation. So however that needs to happen, definitely do that. But I wouldn't put I think the first thing that needs to happen is to identify that solution is bike lanes is the right thing to do. And then if that is the case, absolutely go ahead with the bike lanes.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Sorry, I think I misunderstood.
No, I said it. No,
earlier.
I absolutely said it. So thank you for asking, because now I've told you that I don't agree with it.
Appreciate that.
Ian, do you have a...
Yeah, so just, first off, I'm blessed to be in Pittsburgh, to be honest. We have great bike lanes. We have really good public service. Bill Paduta has done a really good job with bike lane enforcement. And they're installing more and more, which I think Pittsburgh is like, if you want to look at an example of how bike lanes could be better implemented around the United States, this is one place. Now, it is underserved in historically Black neighborhoods, which they're trying to rectify with better transit solutions with the public port authority. But beyond that, a lot of this, I've used bike lanes downtown. I've used a healthy ride system, which is our version of like the city bike divvy in Chicago, like our bike share program. And you get these lovely people that like to park in the bike lanes and everything else. And it actually reminds me of a quote I just said from Kelsey, you talking, and Kunal talking, and Mikki and you talking, is that, there's this great comic, Calvin and Hobbes, back in the day. They go on vacation, their house gets broken into, they come back from vacation, they see their house in shambles, and their parents are just standing there like, the mom's like, I never thought this could ever happen to me. I always thought it could happen to someone else. And the dad chimes in, well, we're all someone else to someone else. And that's a key thing that I remind people, I tell people all the time, you're someone else to someone else. So is what you're doing now going to impact someone else down the line in some manner or fashion? Parking, yes. In some areas it does stink. And yes, oh my God, you might have to walk somewhere. Heaven forbid you have to walk an extra 50 feet. But I think given in today's climate, everyone else could use a little bit of exercise. I know I could use a little exercise myself. So, I will park further out and I will walk in. So that's no problem. So it's just, if you are going to drive somewhere, and this is for everyone else, I don't say that to the group here because the group here understands this, but for everyone else that's listening in now and later on, think about what's happening in the future, what's going to impact you. Don't park in the bike lane, even if it is horribly marked or, it's not there, because a lot of these bikes, people don't understand. Some of them have single brake systems or they don't have dual calipers or something like that. So they can't hit the brake and they can't stop immediately. And if they hit a car going full tilt and they can't go around it, that's a loss of income for them for sure, because they're going to be injured, they're going to be hurt, but also their mode of transportation, possibly their only mode of transportation, is gone. So now they could possibly lose their job, because if, let's say, they don't have public transit around them and they use that bike for everything. So there is larger implications there. So for you to, if you do park in a bike lane, because you're only thinking about yourself and no one else. I'll end my rant there. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good point. I think just thinking about how these things are connected in ways that we often kind of don't consider in many contexts, and what that can mean for the average person. So we should probably wrap up here, and I was going to see if we could go around and get a sign off from everyone, and a sort of, if you have any parting cheers, jeers, slogans you want to, sound off on. You want to go, Ian or Kunal?
Sure, I can start. I want to say, first of all, thanks so much, Mikki, for being here with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. To everyone else, bike safe out there, ride safe on transit, and we'll see you again in a month. This is Kunal.
Yeah, Mikki, thank you for coming on and joining us. This great conversation. I loved hearing Detroit's perspective on public transit, and I can't wait to see what comes of it in the coming years. Transit safe, be safe, think of others. We're a global community now, so don't be a jerk. Please don't be a jerk.
I have to follow that up. This is Kelsey. Mikki, thank you so much. This was a really insightful and I think illuminating conversation, not only for myself, but hopefully for people who've been listening. And yeah, I think my biggest takeaway here, that something you said that I really appreciated, was this idea of, for anyone listening, if any of these kind of topics struck a chord with you, find ways to implement them in your daily life and to become a stakeholder where you live, or become a stakeholder where you are. I think as much as we can, it's easy to rely on these kind of big national things happening and thinking that's going to fix the problem. Ultimately, a lot of this does come back to exactly where we live and work. And so I really appreciate that sentiment and hope other people can find ways to become stakeholders.
Mikki, what you got?
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy being able to talk about transportation. I think, my biggest thing, become a stakeholder. I think, Ian, you said it best. Like, the idea that this doesn't apply to me, the world does not, your world revolves around you, but even then, no. So if you're mad because the line at your grocery store is hella long, support public transit. If you're mad because you went to IKEA and the line is stupid long, realize that people have to get to work. And then when that is your pain point is that, it's been so long, whatever. People got to get there. And if they're not making enough money to own a car, support public transit. And then share the road. This is not your streetcar. If you are in a car, you have the ultimate convenience. So leave the bike lanes alone. Don't complain about transit, and just don't be a jerk. That was it. Like, if somebody's crossing the street, let them cross. Like, be respectful. Look at the road and realize there are other modes of transportation outside of yourself if you're in a car. And then again, thank you very much. I had a great time talking to y'all.
No, for sure. And thank you so much for coming. Thanks for coming to Hand Built Studios Incorporated in lovely Southwest Detroit. I think my parting thoughts would be, there's a lot of great innovative stuff going on, but we also need to think about like what you can do at a really basic level. Like everyone has said, what can you do as a local advocate, a local stakeholder? And like you just said, Mikki, like, just let people do their thing and figure out a way to facilitate how to be involved and be present. And it's like, if someone wants to ride a bike, that's great. I saw a commentary on Facebook about how it's like, it's amazing how a comment like how quickly a comment like kids should be able to ride bikes to school without being run over by SUVs turns into, well, bikes are stupid because you can't carry a couch on a bike. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is that we should have safe infrastructure for everybody. We don't need to just spend billions of dollars on highways and highway widening and extra highway lanes. We should spend money on infrastructure for everybody and make sure these systems are preserved. Make sure these systems are preserved for access to everyone. Well, I think that's about all we have time for. So I will thank you all for tuning in to another exciting episode of the Best Nerds Studio podcast from University of Illinois, Chicago, Summer Institute on Sustainability and Energy, with Kunal, Ian, myself, Mikki, and Kelsey. Thanks so much, everybody.